we talked about the concepts of unemployment, right? How do we classify unemployed people and employed people, right? What are the conditions, right? Remember, in order to be unemployed or in order to be classified as unemployed, you have to be actually actively searching for a job, right? If you're not searching for a job, then you are not considered unemployed, right? In fact, yeah, you drop out of the labor force, right? If you're not actively searching for a job, right? So we talked about how we can calculate actual unemployment rate. Remember, unemployment rate is the number of unemployed people divided by the labor force, not by the entire population, right? That's the point you should remember about the unemployment rate. And the way we calculate the unemployment rate currently, there can be some problems. Okay? There is a possibility that the calculated unemployment rate or official announcement of the government regarding the unemployment rate is actually an understatement. In other words, actual unemployment rate may be actually higher than what the government announces, right? Well, there are a couple of reasons here. The first one is discouraged workers. Discouraged workers refer to people who have given up the search because the search is costly. It takes money to apply for jobs, right? And then after trying some time, maybe a couple of months, right, trying to find a job, they decided that, well, there is no chance that I'm going to find a job here, right, or in this economy, right? So they actually give up on job search, right? Then they will be classified as discouraged worker, right? And they're not going to be counted as part of labor force. Right? Well, so if you think that those people are still unemployed, actually they are unemployed, right? So maybe we should count them as unemployed when you calculate the unemployment rate, right? So in that sense, the actual calculation is actually an understatement, right, of the actual unemployment rate, right? And if you remember, as long as you work only at least 1 hour, at least 1 hour during the week of survey, you are considered employed, right? So part-time workers are considered employed, right? But some of those part-time workers, they may be working part-time just because they couldn't find a full-time job. Okay? And so that's what we call underemployment, right? You want to actually work full-time and work for 40 hours a week, but because you couldn't find a full-time job right now, you're just working 20 hours or 10 hours a week, right? But then as long as you work at least 1 hour, you are considered employed, right? So in that sense, the official announcement of unemployment rate may be gross understatement of actual unemployment rate. Okay? On the other hand, there's a possibility that the calculated unemployment rate may be actually an overstatement, right? Well, because people might claim falsely to be actively looking for work. Right? So some people claim that, well, I'm not working, but I'm actually, searching for a job, right? But in fact, they may not be searching for a job, right? So in that case, according to the official definition of unemployment, they should not be counted. But because they claim that they are actually searching for a job, they will be counted as unemployed, right? So it will be an overstatement of the unemployment rate. Yeah? And then there are people who are actually making some income, right? They're actually working somewhere part-time, yeah? And making some income, but they do not report it to the government. and they actually come to the unemployment office and claim themselves as unemployed in order to collect the benefit, right? Unemployment benefit, right? So those people should not be counted as unemployed, but in fact they will be counted, right? So in that sense, it will result in the overstatement of unemployment rate, right? Any question about this? Okay? Yeah. And then here are some facts about the labor force participation rate, LFPR. This is the case of the United States, right? If you look at last about 50, 60 years, right, we see that the labor force participation rate among men have been declining steadily. Right? And some people express concern about this. They may, claim that the opportunity for men are declining, right? Not as many as before, right? But when we look at the actual reason for the declining LFPR for men, we see a couple of very important reasons. The first one is men have been going to school for longer and also retiring earlier than before, right? So about 60 years ago or 50 years ago, the average acquisition for education might have been maybe 12 years or 11 years, right, of education, which is about what? High school graduate or maybe high school dropout, right? That used to be maybe average acquisition level for education. But over the many decades, that increased, and right now, say most of the people graduate college. Many people go to graduate school to acquire a master's degree or PhD degree, right? So they remain as a full-time students longer in their younger life, right? So that reduces the labor force participation rate. Also, people tend to retire earlier than before, right? In the old days, they had to work until their 70s, right, in order to save enough money for retirement. Right? But these days, we have a better pension system, and they may start saving money earlier, and then maybe that retirement fund increases in the value by the stock market as the stock market appreciates, right? The total value of the retirement fund will also increase, right? So, maybe people are managing their money better so that they can retire early, right? But funny thing is, in 1990, around 1990, the U.S. stock market was appreciating so fast and so much, right? And that's when I was actually trading in the stock market, right? And it almost felt like, you didn't have to do anything. In stock market, there's a saying: the rising tide lifts all boats. Right? Rising tide. When the tide comes in, right, all the boats are lifted. Right? Not just a few boats. Right? So, because of the so much increase in the overall stock market. But right now, last couple of weeks, the Korean stock market has been rising, right? Appreciating. But you didn't have to choose any stock. You just put your money in the stock market because all the stocks basically were rising fast, right? So at that time, a lot of people were dreaming of retiring in their 50s, maybe, right? Or the way the stock market was appreciating, right? And your retirement fund was growing, right? They calculated, well, maybe I could retire at my age of 45. Yeah? After 45, I don't have to work, right? If the stock market goes this way. Right? But pretty soon, around 2001, right? The stock market crashed, right? And they realized that now they are they have to work until their 80s. The way the retirement fund has slashed in the size. All right, so that has been one reason, right? Because of the better retirement system, right? People were retiring early. Yeah? Also, the Social Security disability insurance, right? That's the welfare payment for disabled people, right? If you have some physical challenge, right? Then you could register. The government, pays you some money, right, to support yourself, right? So as a result of increased benefit in this disability insurance, right, a lot of people were not working, right? And a lot of men in that sense, right? Well, on the other hand, if you look at the women's case, right, the labor force participation rate for women has been growing rapidly, right, and also consistently, right? So a lot more women are working full pay these days, right? And there is the gap between men and women has been narrowed significantly in terms of labor force participation rate. Right? That's the current situation. When we look at the unemployment rate by different groups, right? First, the ethnic group. Right? The unemployment rate among Asians living in the United States is very low. Right? That's much lower than the unemployment rate among the African Americans, right? Or Hispanics. Right? So yeah, that's one very significant fact there. Also, when you look at the education level, you see a lot less or a lot lower unemployment rate among college graduates compared to the high school dropouts. Right? And you can derive many observations or many points out of this fact, right? But some are overlapping. For example, among the Asians, right? Among all the ethnic groups, Asians tend to have highest education level, right? Yeah, a lot more college graduates among Asians compared to the African American ethnic group. Right? So that will also explain the lower unemployment rate among the Asians. Right? When we look at the historical changes in unemployment rate, well, you see there's a lot of ups and downs, peaks and valleys, right? And those things represent business cycle. Right? As we talked about, there are business cycle with the about 4 to 8 years of length. Right? So when the economy goes into recession, these pink bars are the recession period, recessionary periods, right? And during that recessionary period, as you see, the unemployment rate shoots up, sparks up, right? One thing very notable here is the last one here. Look at the what happened in 2008, around 2008, right? The unemployment rate increased so much, so fast. Right? Look at this, the size of this increase, right? And compared to all other increases in the unemployment rate, right? There hasn't been that much a fast increase in the unemployment rate during the short period of time. Right? So you can see how severe that financial, what do we call that, financial disturbance, 2008 crisis, financial crisis in the United States was. Right? So this period of 2008 to 2011, right? Between 2008 and 2011, right? The unemployment rate increased around from 5%, or actually below 5%, to about almost 10% level. At some point, the unemployment rate were higher than 11%. If you look at the state-by-state unemployment rate. Okay? So around 2012, they had started using new phrase. Okay? previously non-existent phrase, right? We call this period the Great Recession. 2008 to 2011 period. Yeah. And previously there was no such word, right? We only had the Great Depression, which started in 1929 and it lasted almost 10 years, right? 19 maybe 36 or 39, right? Yep. So it was a really, really bad time in 2008. And President Obama inherited this economic disaster because he took power in 2008. Right? And he was so successful in turning the economy around. Right? And right now, well, the economy is so strong, U.S. economy. Unemployment rate is below 5%, right? So a lot of people give credit to President Obama for that. Okay. So when we look at this, the fluctuation in the unemployment rate, which is related to the business cycle, that brings us to the question of what causes unemployment. Okay? What are the causes of unemployment? Okay? And basically, we think about three different types of unemployment. Okay? The first one is called the frictional unemployment. Okay? Frictional unemployment means a very short and temporary unemployment that people go through while they are searching for a job. Okay? So let's say college students graduate in February, okay? And it takes about 3 months for them to find the job, right? Until May maybe. Right? Then that 3 month period is considered frictional unemployment. Okay? Or you've been working for a company and then maybe a company went out of business, so you lost your job. Okay? And you have to look for the next job, right, somewhere, and it takes a few months to locate another job, right? That period is also frictional unemployment, job search period. Right? Or maybe you voluntarily quit your job because you don't like your current job and you're looking for a different job, right? That will be also considered frictional unemployment. Frictional unemployment also includes some seasonal unemployment. Yeah? Some jobs have seasonality, like ski instructor. Ski instructors have jobs only during the winter period. I mean, you need snow to teach skiing. Or some farm workers, right? If you go to California, they grow lots of oranges, and during the harvest season, they hire a lot of people from overseas, right? From Mexico and many other people, immigrant workers are hired during the harvest season. But U.S. government, what's the name of that office? Immigration, INS, right? Immigration and Naturalization Service, right? INS gives a temporary work permit to these immigrant workers. So a lot of people from Mexico come to California and work in the orange groves to harvest orange, right? But when the season is over, then the job disappears, right? And some of those people will be unemployed. Right? Well, of course, foreign workers have to go back to their country, right? But the domestic workers will be unemployed. Right? That's the idea of seasonal unemployment. Right? So frictional unemployment also includes this seasonal unemployment. Right? The second type of unemployment is called the structural unemployment. Structural unemployment has to do with the economic structure or industrial structure, yeah, or changes in the industrial structure. Okay. And it is mostly related to the skills being obsolete. Skills become obsolete because of the technological advancement. Yeah? When the new technology is used in an industry, right? Well, the workers have to adapt to the new technology. They have to acquire new skills. Right? And so some people may be unemployed because what they used to do, let's say textile mill. A lot of people were working in textile mill, right? But first of all, a lot of textile mills disappeared in the United States because they were outsourced. Okay? The textile companies moved their plants to Mexico or Asia, right? So a lot of textile workers were unemployed, right? And that is considered structural unemployment too, because that unemployment is caused by industrial change, right? The size of textile industry decreased, right? And the demand for the textile workers in the United States have disappeared, right? So the textile workers are unemployed. That is a structural unemployment, right? Because it is related to the changes in industrial structure, right? Okay, and another, there are some textile mills still existing in the U.S., right? But if you go to that textile mill, you see completely different picture, right? About 100 years ago, right? If you go to a textile mill, there were lots of women, mostly, right? Women laborers, right? They were standing next to this textile machine, right? And in case the strand breaks, right? You have to quickly reconnect the strand, right? So that the textile will be produced without any problem, without much problem, right? These days, if you visit the textile mills, you see only machines on the floor. You don't see many people on the entire floor, right? And instead, you will see this control room. There's a highly high-tech control room, and you will see all these monitors on the wall. So the strands, first of all, strands don't break easily these days, right? And if it breaks, everything is monitored, by computer, right? And somebody can actually fix that problem, right? So you don't need many people, many workers in the textile mill anyway, right? So that also includes, that's the structural unemployment. A lot of people lost that job because of the technological advancement in the textile mill, right? Coal mine, for example, yeah? About 50, 60, maybe 70 years ago, most of the factories used coal as their energy source. They burned coal to generate steam, and that the steam turbine operated these machines, right? But these days, not many factories use coal, right? So most of the factories use either oil or electricity, right? So the demand for coal has disappeared. A lot of demand for coal disappeared, which means a lot of coal miners lost their jobs, right? And their mining skill became obsolete, right? So if they want to find another job, they have to acquire new skill, right? Because that the very important characteristic of this structural unemployment is once these jobs are lost, they never come back. Because it is related to the technological advancement. Right? Once the technology advances, it never retreats, it never goes back. Right? So these lost jobs don't come back as far as the structural unemployment is concerned. Right? So the unemployment spell, the time length, okay, for unemployment tends to be longer compared to the frictional unemployment, okay? And those jobs tend not to come back once they are lost. Right? That's the characteristic of structural unemployment. Okay? Now, cyclical unemployment, the last type of unemployment is cyclical unemployment. Cyclical unemployment has to do with business cycle. Okay? Because of the economic downturn, recession, right? The demand for goods and services become weaker, and that means the companies will have to reduce their output, and they'll have to reduce their workforce, right? So some people will have to be let go of, right? And they will become unemployed, right? That's the idea of cyclical unemployment. Yeah? As we've talked about before, right? Over the many years, we tend to have this long-term secular trend in the economic or GDP, let's say real GDP, over many years, say starting from 1910 to say 2010, right? And well, actually, if you look at the actual number, it will be like this, right? Exponential growth in the economic output or GDP. Right? But we don't see this straight linear, consistent growth, right? There are ups and downs around this long-term trend. Yeah? So sometimes economic activity is higher than long-term trend, right? Sometimes below than the long-term trend. Right? So this is completely unnecessary. Yeah? We don't need business cycle. And I told you, most of the economists consider the cause of this business cycle is politics, right? Political election, right? Because of this, 4 to 8 year cycle. Right? Now, so if we want to, if it's ever possible, we'd like to eliminate this unemployment, cyclical unemployment. Right? That should be the goal of economic policy, to reduce or eliminate cyclical unemployment, because it's completely unnecessary. Right? But first two types of unemployment, frictional and structural unemployment. Right? There is nothing you can do about those things because, well, think about frictional unemployment. We're talking about job search, right? And you have to go through this job search period to find another job or your first job, right? So it is necessary. If you don't like your current job, you should be able to quit and look for another job, right? So yeah, that's also necessary, right? What about the structural unemployment? Structural unemployment mostly has to do with change in technology or industrial structure, right? And well, we cannot block or stop, or we cannot deter the technological advancement. Actually, we have to bring in or accelerate the technological advancement, right? And that means people or workers constantly need to update their skills. Okay? So structural unemployment is also necessary. Okay? So there is nothing we can do, or there is nothing we should do about the frictional unemployment and the structural unemployment. Right? The only type of unemployment we are concerned is cyclical unemployment. Remember? Okay? Okay, so what we have here, let's see. We have frictional, structural, and cyclical. There are some estimates, it's just an estimate, but in normal times, they think there's a 1 to 3% frictional unemployment. In other words, up to 1 to 3% of labor force are frictionally unemployed. Right? And normal times, they think anywhere between 2 to 3% structural unemployment. These are just the estimate, right? So they are not really accurate, right? And they change over time. Huh? They change over time, right? So when you add them up, about 5 to 6%, up to 5 to 6% of people, 5 to 6% of labor force is always unemployed. Even when the economy is perfect, okay? Some people are searching for the job because they want to change their job or they're freshly out of school. Right? And some people are out of the job because their skills became obsolete. There is no more demand for the product they used to produce. Right? So what we call this 5 to 6% is natural rate of unemployment. Natural rate of unemployment. Okay. And when the total unemployment rate is about 5 to 6%, or at the natural rate, we say we have achieved full employment. Full employment. Okay? So when we say full employment, it doesn't mean we have zero unemployment rate. Remember that? When we say full employment, that we don't mean that everybody is working. Right? Some people are still unemployed. Right? Because some unemployments are unavoidable, right? And those are necessary. Okay? So when we say full employment, what we mean is cyclical unemployment. Cyclical unemployment is what? Zero. Yeah. We mean cyclical unemployment is zero. Okay? So the only unemployment we have at that time is either frictional and structural, right? But no cyclical unemployment. Okay? So achieving the full employment is the goal of economic policy or macroeconomic policy, right? And that means we're trying to eliminate the cyclical unemployment because this is unnecessary. Okay? Remember that? This is just an example of Caterpillar company. In 2013, they lay off a lot of workers at South Milwaukee plant. Okay? Layoff. Layoff. This is the word I could not understand when I first went to the United States. Right? Layoff means, well, suppose you're working for a company, right? And one morning you go to work, and on your desk you see this little pink slip. Okay? pink slip. Yeah? Small paper in pink color, right? And that means you are laid off as of today, right? And the pink slip may say the period of layoff, right? It may say for the next 1 month or maybe 3 months, right? Or some may say indefinitely until further announcement, you are laid off, right? So if you have a desk, you will see this in your desk or in your mailbox, or if you're a factory worker, right? You know, there's a cabinet, you change your clothes, right? Put your street clothes in and change into the work clothes, right? And you will see this pink slip on your cabinet, right? And then, amazing thing is, as soon as these workers find this pink slip, they don't say anything. They just, well, I'm not laid off. Let's go home. They go back home and do some chores, maybe household chores, or maybe they go to fishing or drinking, whatever, right? That's so easy. Yeah? And until that time, around 1980, my experience in Korea just didn't allow this the concept of layoff. How can you let the people go so easily just because the economy slowed down and demand for your product became lower, right? So you don't need as many workers, right? Well, in 1979, that was the worst time in Korean economy, right? Most of the 60s and 70s Korean economy has been growing around 10% annually, or sometimes 12% annually, right? Right now, China is growing fast, but their economic growth rate is about 8%, right? So the South Korean economy was growing at a phenomenal rate, right? And then in 1979 and 1980, the economic growth rate of South Korea was actually negative 0.5%. Right? Can you imagine that? One of the largest group, Ulsan, right? I think at that time the list was Hyundai, Samsung, Daewoo, and then Ulsan. Ulsan was, I think, the fourth largest group, right? That group completely went bankrupt, right? And disappeared, right? Suddenly, right? And a lot of people were unemployed. But even in that situation, Korean companies did not let people go. They could not, because there was no such system or concept, right? So what they did was, companies like Samsung or Daehan Electric, I think that there was a TEC, Daehan Electric company, right? They were producing a lot of refrigerators. Lucky Gold Star was producing TV sets, right? You know Lucky Gold Star? That's the old name for LG. Yeah. Lucky was the company that produced toothpaste. Eh? Lucky toothpaste, yeah. And then the Gold Star produced this TV set. Eh? Somehow they combined and became Lucky Gold Star and LG now. Right? Anyway, so what they did was, well, they talked to their labor management, discussed this situation with the labor, right? And they agreed that for the next few months until the economy improves, we won't be able to pay you, right? But you can continue to work, right? But we're not going to be able to pay you. Instead, we're going to pay you in goods, like TV sets or refrigerator, whatever the company produced, right? So why don't you take these things instead of salary, right? And if you can sell them, that would be great, right? But when the economy is so low, there is no demand for these, TV sets or refrigerator and whatever, right? So a lot of people, what they did was they found some rich uncle, right? Some people among their relatives or friends who have a lot of money, right? And they brought these things to them and, asked for their help, right? So why don't you keep these things until the economy improves and, we can sell this thing at that time. But meanwhile, why don't you lend me some money, right? So the workers had to do that themselves, right? But they accepted it because they know the situation. They knew the situation was terrible, right? Otherwise, the company had to shut down, right? And instead of being unemployed, right, they chose that option, right? So somehow the management and labor got together, right? And that they passed this the tough situation, right? But in the U.S., I found out that, well, whenever the economy goes down, economy slows down, the company simply issues the pink slip, right? And then workers just accept it. Yeah? Hey, I'm laid off, no job, no work. Right? How is it possible? Why do they accept this kind of policy? Right? Well, because in the U.S. there's a wonderful unemployment insurance. Right? So all the employers have to put in this unemployment insurance. They must pay. Anytime you hire one person, you have to get the insurance for that person, unemployment insurance, which means you pay some premium every month, right? Every pay period. Every time you pay the worker, you have to pay some percentage of the person's salary into the unemployment insurance system, which is run by the government, right? And when you lay off some workers, these workers will receive the unemployment insurance benefit, right? Just like car insurance, right? So, you pay the premium in case your car gets into an accident, you get paid, right? So, that's just that's the system, and I believe in South Korea these days you have layoffs, right? Company can lay off workers. Is that right? What do you call that in Korean? Letting people go when the economy slows down. Isn't it called the 정리해고? Yeah? Something like that, right? So in order to survive the bad economy, the company has to restructure the company, right? And that involves reducing the number of workers, right? So I think that is allowed by the Korean labor law these days, right? 정리하고. All right. Anyway, so in Caterpillar situation, some people are laid off. Is that a frictional unemployment, or structural unemployment, or cyclical unemployment? Right? Well, if you look at the details, how do you determine? How do you determine whether this is a structural unemployment or cyclical unemployment? Right? If it's a cyclical unemployment, because it has to do with the economy, right? All the industries will be affected, right? Overall, right? So if the unemployment rate increases across different industries, right, then that will be a cyclical unemployment, right? But unemployment happens only within a specific industry, like this, the Caterpillar mine equipment manufacturing industry, right? Then it's not a cyclical unemployment, right? It has to do with something, some changes within the industry, right? the demand for that equipment has disappeared, right? So it has to be a structural unemployment. Right? So in this situation, they discovered that, this is more of structural unemployment, right? Yeah. So mining products were in decline, decreasing demand for Caterpillar's mining machinery, but sales of other equipment remained strong, right? Caterpillar makes lots of equipment, especially the earth-moving, like bulldozers and those things, earth-moving equipment, right? So apparently the laid-off occurred only within the mining equipment manufacturing. So this must be a structural unemployment. Right? Any questions so far? Right. Let's go to the second part. Second part of this chapter is on inflation. Right? So far we've talked about unemployment, but we're going to talk about inflation now. Both unemployment and inflation are considered vice in the economics. Evil. Those are evil. Right? So we try to reduce or eliminate both unemployment and inflation. Right? The difficulty is there is a trade-off. Right? If you try to reduce unemployment, what can you do? Well, if you want to reduce unemployment, you have to make the economy stronger, right? So that there will be more jobs, right? More employment, more people will be employed, right? But in order to do that, what the government can do is they can increase the government spending, right? Which means they will purchase lots of goods and services, right? And that will increase the demand, right? Demand for goods and services, right? So we didn't really actually talk about this thing. We're going to talk about this analysis in the later chapter, right? But here's in macroeconomics, instead of Q, we use Y. Right? I mentioned this before, right? And Y actually represent three different things. Right? It stands for output, GDP, right? We use Y to represent that output. And then output equals income, right, in the overall economy, right? So Y also represents income, total income, national income, right? And then it also represents employment, right? In macroeconomics, these three things are related, right? Output, income, and employment, right? If the employment increases, that means more people are working for pay, so the total income will increase, right? All right. On the vertical axis, we use P, but this P is not a price for any single product. We're talking about the overall economy, right? So this P stands for price level, right? Overall price level. Right? And then we have demand and supply. Right? But again, we're not talking about any single product here, but the overall demand and overall supply in the entire economy. Right? We call that aggregate supply and aggregate demand. Just basically total demand for goods and services. Right? All right. Now the government increases the spending, right? And they purchase lots of goods and services, right? They start, say, huge construction project, like Hoover Dam, right? And that's going to hire a lot of people, right? And that's going to purchase a lot of, the materials and equipment, right? So what that means is demand for goods and services will increase. Aggregate demand shifts up, right? And then the next step is, well, since more people are employed, right, they receive income, right? So more people have income. So they can purchase more goods and services, right? So in the next round, next period, not just because of the government spending, but as a result, more people have money, right? And they're going to purchase lots of goods and services, right? So that's, you know, further increase aggregate demand. Right? Okay. So, well, what happens to output and income and employment? Well, it's gonna increase, right? Both output and income will increase, and the employment will also increase. I mean, if you want to produce more output, you need more workers, right? And that's the goal. That was the goal of government policy, right? However, what? The price level is gonna rise as a result, right? So when the employment increases, that means unemployment decreases, right? And if you want, or if government wants, they can do that. They can reduce the unemployment, right? But the problem is the price level is going to rise, and that means inflation. We're going to have inflation, right? So that's the trade-off between the unemployment and inflation, right? So what do you have to do then? Which one should you choose? Should you choose to reduce the unemployment at the cost of inflation? Or should you choose to reduce inflation, which means you will have to suffer some unemployment, right? That's the big question in macroeconomics, right? And actually, economists have different views on it. Some people say unemployment is the most serious concern, because when workers are unemployed, their family will be affected, right? And that's a serious situation if you can't support your family, right? A lot of people can commit suicide when they can't support their family. You know, the debt level increases, right? And when the debt grows too much, they cannot handle, right? People commit suicide, right? So some economists say, we have to focus on unemployment rate, and we have to accept some inflation, right? But the thing is, when the inflation increases, it has negative effect on the economy, which means high inflation will bring high unemployment, right? So some economists believe that no, the inflation should be the target, right? So when the Federal Reserve or whatever the policy-making body of the government, right, try to come up with the economic policy, they should use inflation as the target, right? Keeping the inflation at a certain level, right? And that will also control the unemployment rate, right? All right, so the idea of inflation is the increase in the price level from one year to the next, right? Or the different textbooks give different definition. A lot of textbooks give the trying to remember that definition. The word something like continuing increase in general price level. Let's see. Increase in general or overall price level instead of temporary or short period, what was the word? Something like consistent or I can't remember that exact word. I'll find out. Right? Lasting more than a short period, right? So sometimes you have a very short period of spark in the price level, like say 1 week or 2 weeks, right? Because of some, say, situation, weather, right? Let's say flood or whatever, the hurricane, right? The price level sparks up because of the supply of this the food and whatever gas is disrupted, right? But that's not considered inflation. Right? In order to be qualified as inflation, you have to have a consistent increase in general price level, overall price level. So if you see an increase in price of a few things, that's not going to be considered inflation, right? But we are talking about the general or overall price level, right? Yeah, and over some substantial period instead of just very short period like 1 or 2 weeks, right? So in order to be qualified as inflation, it has to continue for some substantial time, right? And it has to happen on overall prices rather than a few things, right? Well, we talked about GDP deflator in the previous chapter. Remember, what's the GDP deflator? It's the ratio between nominal GDP and real GDP, right? Nominal GDP and real GDP, right? So using the GDP deflator, we could find out about the price level, right? And then by comparing two GDP deflators, we can calculate the inflation rate, or how much change there was in the price level between 2 years, right? All right. In addition to GDP deflator, we can use CPI and PPI, Consumer Price Index and Producer Price Index, to calculate the inflation rate, right? And those two, CPI and PPI, are two most popular, right? The price indices. Right? The CPI measures the cost of living. Cost of living. And the way they calculate the CPI is, first of all, they have to come up with the basket of goods, or market basket. The basket of goods, right? I think it was persistent instead of consistent. Yeah, persistent. Persistent growth or increase in the general price level. Right? That's the definition of inflation, right? In most other textbooks. Right? All right. The CPI measures the cost of living for a typical urban family of 4. Right? So they're thinking about the life of a family of 4 people, I guess parents and 2 children, or maybe a single parent and 3 children, right? Something like that, right? And I don't know, maybe it could be grandpa, grandma, or and single parent and 1 child. Anyway, so family of 4, right? Living in urban area, not rural area, right? And they survey 14,000 families, something like 14,000 households, right? And ask them what do you purchase, right? And how many units? right? Say in a month, right? Just what kind of things do you purchase and in how many units, right? So maybe say they come up with 10 loaves of bread or 8 gallons of milk or whatever, right? So they come up with this basket of goods. Yeah? So what kind of goods do households purchase, right? And in how many units, right? And then they multiply the price of each item and add them up. Yeah? So that's going to be the total cost of living for this family. Right? So what's the the cost of living for an average family? Right? So here is an example. Let's say, yeah. So for simplicity, we're just assuming 3 items here: eye examination, pizzas, and books. Right? And let's say on average, so each family, on average family, they purchase 1 eye examination maybe per year, right? 20 pizzas per year or 20 books per year, right? And then we have prices for each thing, right? And then we multiply the price by the unit. So total cost is $750 in 1999. And suppose we're using 1999 as the base year, right? And then we collect the same information for 2014 and 15, right? We have some changes in the prices. So you multiply the prices by the quantity for each item. So we are assuming that this basket of goods remain the same for some years. I think typically about 10 years. Right? When they calculate CPI, they assume that the basket of goods remain the same. So they use the same item and same quantity, right? But just multiply different prices. Okay? So in 2014, the total expenditure or total cost of living came out to be $900. In 2015, $915, right? So these changes reflect only the changes in prices, right? Because we are using the same quantity. Remember? Okay, in the future economics courses, you're going to learn about 2 different index numbers. Las Perez index versus Page index, right? And there are different ways to calculate the Las Perez index and Page index. Right? The CPI is Las Perez index, right? And the way we multiply the price and the quantity, we are holding the quantity constant, okay? And change the prices. Right? And so how do we use this number then? Divide the total expenditures in the current year by the total expenditure in the base year and multiply 100, right? So in 2014, it was 900. The base period, 1999, it was 750, right? And when we multiply 100, we get 120. So what does that mean? CPI for 2014 is 120. Can someone interpret this number? What does that mean? CPI of 120. Not that difficult. Huh? Prices increased by 20%, right? Right. Okay. In other words, if you think about the same market, the same basket of goods, right? In order to purchase the same basket of goods, if it cost $100 in 1999, in 2014, which is 15 years later, it will cost $120, right? That's what that means, CPI, cost of living, right? Whatever you could purchase at $100 in the base year, right? This year, it's going to cost you $120, right? For the same basket of goods. Understand? And knowing that we are using the same quantity for same item, the only change was price level, right? That means there was a 20% increase in price level, or overall price level, right? For 2015, it comes out to be 122, right? So that means between the base year and the 2015, there was 22% increase in the general price level, which means the cost of living, right? Cost of living increased by 22% from 1999 to 2015, right? So we use this, where do we use the CPI number, right? We use this CPI for COLA, right? Cost of living adjustment, cost of living adjustment, right? And this is used very frequently in many places. For example, if you look at union labor contract, right? If you belong to a labor union, right? Typical labor contract says, well, this person's wage will increase every year, right? At say 3% plus COLA. So what that means is if you work for this company or if you're a member of this labor union, right, your wage will increase by 3% every year, right? And then you will also get some cost of living adjustment, right? Which means during the last 1 year, let's say CPI number was 4%, which means the cost of living increased by 4%, right? Then they're going to add 4% here. Right? So your total wage increase will be 7%. Okay, that's the idea of the coming up with fair increase in wages for workers, and also for government benefits like Social Security payment. Okay? You're retired, you're receiving the pension payment, right? And if your pension is not indexed, it is also called index. The pension payments are indexed, which means it will be adjusted for the cost of living index, like CPI. Right? So, you know, when you retire, your pension payment will be calculated based on your contribution. And let's say every month you are supposed to receive, what, say $250 every month, right? Starting from, say, suppose you retired at age 68, right? And until you die, right? You are supposed to receive $250 per month. But the thing is, there's inflation every year, right? Which means cost of living increases every year, right? And if there is no COLA, if your fund retirement payment is not indexed, right, then the real value or real purchasing power of $250 will decrease every year, right? With the same $250, the amount of actual goods and services you can purchase will go down every year, right? Because of inflation, right? So in order to avoid that problem, you're going to be, most of the government payments are indexed, okay? Which means they will make the cost of living adjustment. And for that purpose, CPI is used, okay, for most of the cases. Okay? PPI is the same idea, but it's a producer price index, right? So instead of consumption goods, it's going to collect the price information on the production-related goods, like energy, equipment, and the material. Right? So that's more relevant to the managers rather than the consumers. Okay? We're going to continue this chapter and on Tuesday. Any question? All right. Have a good weekend.